The sound of carriage wheels on gravel sent Kara scrambling toward the kitchen, with a basket of turnips still clutched against her chest, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack a rib. "Kara, they are still 10 minutes away," Dorian called from the front hall, his voice carrying that measured calm that never seemed to falter no matter the circumstance. She did not slow. 10 minutes was barely enough time to get the cellar door closed and the rug smoothed over it. Barely enough time to make herself vanish like she had never existed in this house at all. Her bare feet slapped against the kitchen flagstones as she yanked open the narrow door beside the pantry and descended the wooden ladder into the root cellar, the basket of turnips abandoned on the counter above. The smell of earth and stored vegetables enveloped her as she pulled the trapdoor shut, and the light narrowed to a thin line between the boards before disappearing entirely when she heard Dorian's boots cross the kitchen floor above, and the rug whisper back into place. Darkness. The familiar darkness of shame and safety intertwined so tightly she could not separate one from the other anymore. Kara pressed her back against the cool earthen wall and tried to slow her breathing, tried to make herself small and silent as the voices began to filter down from above. She recognized the high, brittle laugh of Lady Marjorie Whitfield, the boom of Lord Whitfield's voice, the lighter tones of their daughter whose name Kara could never quite remember. Important people. The kind of people whose good opinion kept a man like Dorian respected in this rural corner of the realm, whose social favor meant contracts signed and land deals honored, and a gentleman farmer's reputation intact. The kind of people who would be horrified to know an orc woman lived in this house. Not as a servant, which would have been scandalous enough, but as something far less definable and far more damning. She had been here 8 months. 8 months since Dorian had found her half frozen in his barn during the worst cold snap of late autumn, her threadbare cloak doing nothing against the wind that howled through the valley. She had been heading south, away from the border territories, where tensions between orc clans and human settlements made every day a calculated risk. Away from the village that had driven her out when the blacksmith's son had tried to force himself on her, and she had broken his arm defending herself. Away from everything, with no destination in mind except somewhere warmer and somewhere she might disappear. Dorian had not called the magistrate. He had not fetched his hunting rifle. He had simply looked at her with those steady gray eyes and said, "You will freeze to death out here tonight. Come inside." She had expected a barn stall, perhaps, or a spot near the kitchen fire in exchange for work. Instead, he had given her the small guest room on the second floor, the one with the window overlooking the eastern fields and the patchwork quilt his mother had stitched before she died. He had asked her name and offered his own. He had set a bowl of stew in front of her, and said nothing about the way her hands shook holding the spoon, nothing about her green skin or the small tusks that curved up from her lower jaw, or the pointed tips of her ears that marked her as something humans had been taught to fear. "You can stay through winter," he had said. "If you want to move on come spring, that is your choice, but you do not have to." Spring had come and gone. She had not moved on. The voices overhead grew louder as the party moved into the dining room, which shared a floor with the kitchen. Kara could make out words now, Dorian's deep rumble offering refreshments, Lady Marjorie's affected delight at the furniture, Lord Whitfield's blunt questions about crop yields and irrigation improvements. This visit mattered, she knew. The Whitfields owned the land adjacent to Dorian's southern border, and there had been talk for months about a shared water rights agreement that would benefit both properties. Dorian needed this to go well, which was why Kara was in the cellar, as always. She closed her eyes and tried not to think about the breakfast they had shared that morning, The way Dorian had smiled at her over his coffee when she had complained about the hen that kept escaping the coop. She tried not to think about the previous evening when they had sat together in the front room, her mending his spare shirts while he reviewed ledgers, the comfortable silence between them more intimate than any conversation. She tried not to think about the fact that she loved him, had loved him for months now, and that the love was a weight she carried alone because speaking it aloud would only make the hiding worse. He cared for her. She was certain of that much. He brought her books from town, the kind with adventurous heroines and improbable happy endings. He taught her to read the ledgers so she could help with the household accounts. He asked her opinion on everything from which fields to let lie fallow to whether the parlor curtains needed replacing. When she had fallen ill with fever in early spring, he had sat by her bedside for 2 days, bathing her forehead with cool cloths and coaxing her to drink willow bark tea. But he had never touched her with anything more than friendly warmth. He had never suggested she might be more than a guest in his home, and every time visitors came, he let her hide in the cellar without protest, which told her everything she needed to know about what she really was to him. A secret, a liability, something to be kept out of sight. She had no right to ask for more. She had no right to feel the sharp ache in her chest when she heard his laughter ring out upstairs, shared with people who could stand beside him in daylight. She pressed her palm flat against the earthen wall and reminded herself that this was still more than she had ever expected to have. A warm house, enough food, safety, kindness. A man who treated her as though her thoughts mattered, even if he could never treat her as though her presence did. The meal above seemed to last forever. Kara counted her breaths, then counted the jars of preserves on the shelf beside her, then gave up counting and simply existed in the dark. She had grown practiced at this, at making time pass without letting her thoughts spiral into bitterness. She had brought a candle down with her, tucked in her apron pocket along with a flint, but she did not light it. The darkness was easier. In the darkness, she did not have to see the dirt under her fingernails or the rough weave of her work dress, or the way her hands looked too large and too rough for a woman who had once dreamed of being more than tolerated. Eventually, the voices moved back toward the front hall. Goodbyes echoed down through the floorboards, elaborate and prolonged. The front door opened and closed. Carriage wheels crunched on gravel, growing fainter. Silence settled over the house like snow. Kara waited. She always waited an extra 10 minutes after the guests left, giving Dorian time to settle back into the rhythm of the house before she emerged. It was an unspoken agreement between them, this pretense that she had simply been out in the garden or up in her room, anywhere but cowering in the cellar like a shameful secret. But this time, the cellar door opened after only a minute. Light spilled down the ladder, bright enough to make her squint. Dorian's silhouette filled the opening above, his broad shoulders blocking some of the glow. "Kara," he said, and his voice was strange. Not angry, not cold, but tight with something she could not identify. "Come up, please." Her stomach clenched. Had something gone wrong? Had Lady Marjorie somehow discovered her presence, some forgotten sign left out in the open? She climbed the ladder quickly, her hands finding the rungs by memory, and emerged into the kitchen to find Dorian standing with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Did the meeting go well?" she asked carefully, brushing dust from her skirt. "Did Lord Whitfield agree to the water rights?" "They are still here," Dorian said. The words did not make sense. Kara stared at him, her mind scrambling to understand. "What? The Whitfields? They are in the parlor. I told them I needed to fetch something from the kitchen." He uncrossed his arms and held out his hand to her, palm up. "Come with me." Panic flooded through her, cold and sharp. "Dorian, no, no, I cannot. They will see me." "Yes," he said. They will. You will lose the water rights. You will lose their respect. They will tell everyone in the county that you harbor an orc under your roof. They will, Kara. He stepped closer, his hand still extended. I am not asking you to hide anymore. I am asking you to stand with me. She could not move. Her feet had rooted to the kitchen floor, her whole body locked in place by the sheer impossibility of what he was suggesting. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper. Why would you do this? His expression softened, and for the first time in the 8 months she had known him, she saw something raw and unguarded in his face. Because I am tired of pretending you do not matter to me. Because I am tired of watching you disappear every time someone knocks on the door. Because if I have to choose between the respect of people who would despise you for existing and the woman who has become the center of my life, I choose you. I will choose you every time. The word struck her like a physical blow. The center of his life. Her vision blurred, and she realized with distant horror that she was crying, tears streaming down her face in a way she had not allowed herself to cry since the night he had found her in the barn. Dorian, you do not understand what you are risking. They will shun you. You will lose everything you have built here. Then I will build something else. He reached out and gently took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers with steady warmth. But I will not build it on the foundation of your shame. Not anymore. She wanted to argue. She wanted to pull away, to shove him back toward the parlor and bar the cellar door behind her, to save him from his own terrible, wonderful foolishness. But his hand was warm around hers, and his eyes were so steady and so sure, and she realized with a lurch of dizzy terror that she wanted this. Wanted it more than safety, more than the careful half-life she had been living, more than anything. What do I do? She whispered. Walk with me, Dorian said. Let me introduce you. He led her out of the kitchen, through the short hallway, into the parlor where the Whitfields sat arranged on the furniture like a tableau of genteel society. Lady Marjorie perched on the settee with her daughter beside her, both women frozen with teacups halfway to their lips. Lord Whitfield stood near the fireplace, his bushy eyebrows climbing toward his receding hairline as his gaze locked on Kara. Dorian did not falter. He walked her into the center of the room, his hand still clasping hers, and addressed the stunned family with perfect formal courtesy. Lord Whitfield, Lady Marjorie, Miss Catherine, please allow me to introduce Kara Prynne. She is the lady of this house. The silence that followed was absolute. Lady Marjorie's teacup rattled against its saucer. Miss Catherine made a small, stifled sound. Lord Whitfield's face had gone a mottled red that clashed with his burgundy waistcoat. Dorian, Lord Whitfield said, his voice strained, what is the meaning of this? The meaning, Dorian said calmly, is exactly what I stated. Kara manages this household. She keeps the accounts, oversees the staff, makes every decision that keeps this estate running smoothly. She has done so for months. I rely on her judgment in all things, and I value her presence here more than I can adequately express. He glanced at Kara, and there was something fierce and protective in his expression. I apologize for not introducing her at the beginning of your visit. That was a discourtesy I should not have allowed. She is an orc, Lady Marjorie said faintly. She is, Dorian agreed. And she is welcome in my home, at my table, and in my life. Lord Whitfield set down his brandy glass with enough force that the crystal rang out like a small bell. Dorian Gale, I have known your family for 30 years. Your father was a respected man, an honorable man. He would be appalled by this. My father taught me to judge people by their character, not their bloodline, Dorian interrupted, his voice still level but edged now with steel. Kara has more integrity and strength than half the so-called respectable people I have met in this county. I am not ashamed of her, Lord Whitfield. I am proud to have her here." Kara felt lightheaded. The room seemed too bright, the air too thin. She was intensely aware of the way Lady Marjorie was staring at her, the revulsion barely masked behind a veneer of shock. Miss Catherine had pressed herself back against the settee as though afraid Kara might lunge at her. Lord Whitfield looked like a man who had bitten into an apple and found half a worm. "The water rights agreement," Lord Whitfield said slowly, his gaze hard on Dorian. "You understand this changes things." "I understand," Dorian said. "I cannot in good conscience enter into a partnership with a man who harbors such dangerous individuals under his roof. What would my neighbors think? What would the magistrates say? There are laws, Dorian, customs, there are prejudices," Dorian said quietly. "And yes, I understand that you will not sign the agreement now. I am sorry for that, because I believe it would have benefited us both, but I will not apologize for Kara's presence in my home." Lord Whitfield drew himself up, his jowls quivering with indignation. "Then we have nothing further to discuss. Marjorie, Catherine, we are leaving." Lady Marjorie stood so quickly she nearly upset her teacup. Miss Catherine followed, her face pale and pinched. They swept toward the door with the exaggerated dignity of people determined to make their exit a statement. Lord Whitfield paused in the doorway and looked back at Dorian with something that might have been genuine regret beneath the anger. "You are throwing away everything your family built," he said. "For what? An orc who should not even be here." Dorian's hand tightened around Kara's. "I am building something better," he said. "And she belongs here more than anyone." Lord Whitfield shook his head and walked out. The front door closed behind the Whitfields with a heavy, final thud. Kara stood in the sudden silence of the parlor, her heart racing, her mind a blank white roar of shock. Dorian released her hand and moved to the window, watching through the lace curtains as the Whitfield carriage rolled away down the drive. "I am sorry," she said, and her voice broke on the words. "Dorian, I am so sorry. The water rights were important. You needed that agreement. I need you," Dorian said, turning from the window to face her. "Kara, I need you more than I need water rights or social standing or the good opinion of people who would judge you without knowing you." He crossed the room to her, his expression open and raw in a way she had never seen before. "I should have done this months ago. I should never have let you hide in the first place. I was a coward and I am sorry." She stared at him, this man who had just sacrificed so much for her, this impossible, stubborn, beautiful man. "You are not a coward," she managed. "You are the bravest person I have ever met." "Then be brave with me," Dorian said. He reached up and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb, the gesture so tender it made her chest ache. "Stay. Not in the cellar, not in the shadows. Stay here with me where you belong." She could not speak. She nodded instead, a jerky, graceless movement. And then she was stepping forward and he was pulling her into his arms and she was crying in earnest now. Great shuddering sobs that she muffled against his shoulder. He held her tightly, one hand cradling the back of her head, and she felt the tension that had lived in her bones for 8 months finally begin to loosen. "I love you," she whispered into the fabric of his shirt. "I have loved you for so long, and I thought I could never tell you. I know," Dorian murmured. "I know. And I love you. I have loved you since the morning I found you reorganizing my entire pantry because you said the system I had was inefficient. I have loved you through every dinner, every conversation, every moment I have been lucky enough to share with you. I am sorry it took me so long to show it properly." She pulled back enough to look up at him, her vision still blurred with tears. "What do we do now?" "Now," Dorian said, "we live. No more hiding, no more shame. We make a life together and we do it in the open." It sounded impossible. It sounded terrifying. It sounded like everything she had ever wanted and convinced herself she could never have. All right, she said. Yes, all right. He smiled at her, a real smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and bent to press a kiss to her forehead. Thank you, he said, for being brave enough to stay. The next days were strange and difficult in ways Kara had not fully anticipated. Dorian did not hide what had happened with the Whitfields. When he went into the village 2 days later to purchase supplies, he took Kara with him, and the whispers followed them through the market square like a cold wind. People stared. Merchants who usually greeted Dorian with warmth turned away or offered curt nods. One woman pulled her child behind her skirts when Kara walked past, as though proximity to an orc might be contagious. But Dorian walked through it all with his head high and his hand resting lightly on the small of Kara's back, a steady, grounding presence. He introduced her to the grocer, the butcher, the woman who sold honey and beeswax candles. Some accepted the introductions with tight-lipped courtesy. Others refused outright, turning their backs or muttering about unnatural alliances. "I am sorry," Kara said quietly as they loaded supplies into the wagon. "This is what I was afraid of. You are losing your place here because of me." "I am finding my place," Dorian corrected. He climbed onto the wagon bench beside her and took up the reins. "The people who matter will come around. The ones who do not, I am better off without." She wanted to believe him. She tried to believe him. But as the weeks passed, and the social isolation became more pronounced, she felt the old shame creeping back in. Invitations that used to arrive regularly for Dorian stopped coming. His largest buyer for grain backed out of their contract, citing vague concerns about reputation. The blacksmith, who had been friendly enough before, now refused to prioritize repairs for Dorian's equipment, leaving him waiting weeks for work that should have taken days. Kara began to wake in the early mornings with a knot of dread in her stomach. She would lie in her bed, still the guest room, though Dorian had quietly moved her belongings to the larger chamber next to his own and installed a new wardrobe, and wonder how long he could sustain this before resentment set in. How long before he looked at her and saw not the woman he loved, but the source of all his troubles. She tried to make herself indispensable. She threw herself into the work of the household, managing the accounts with meticulous care, overseeing the 2 hired hands who worked the fields, planning meals and mending clothes and scrubbing floors until her hands were raw. If she could just be useful enough, valuable enough, maybe it would balance out the cost of her presence. Dorian noticed, of course. One evening in late summer, when Kara was bent over the kitchen table calculating yields and expenses by lamplight long after supper had ended, he came in and gently took the pencil from her hand. "Enough," he said. "I am almost finished," she protested. "I just need to make sure the numbers for the hay harvest are Kara." He pulled out the chair beside her and sat down, his expression serious. "Talk to me. What is wrong?" Everything she wanted to say. Nothing she wanted to say. Instead, she stared down at the ledger and whispered, "I am afraid you will regret this. Regret me." "Never," Dorian said immediately with such fierce certainty that she had to look at him. "Kara, listen to me. I know these past weeks have been difficult. I know the rejection stings. But not once, not for a single moment, have I regretted choosing you. You understand. You have lost so much," she said. "The water rights, the grain contract, your standing in the community, things," Dorian said. "I have lost things. And yes, some of those things were important, but they are not irreplaceable. You are irreplaceable. What we have is irreplaceable." She shook her head, the knot in her chest pulling tighter. "I cannot stand the thought that I am hurting you. That every time someone turns their back on you, it is because of me. Maybe it would be better if I left. If I went south, found somewhere else, no." His voice cracked like a whip, sharp enough to make her flinch. He softened immediately, reaching out to take her hands in his. Kara, no. Please. If you left, it would not undo what has already happened. People already know. And even if they forgot, even if my reputation could be magically restored, I would not want it at the cost of losing you. I would rather be a pariah with you beside me than respected and alone. But no buts, he said. I am not a child who needs to be protected from the consequences of his choices. I knew what I was doing when I brought you out of that cellar. I knew, and I chose you anyway, and I would choose you 1,000 times over. The only thing that could truly hurt me is if you decided I was not worth staying for. The words pierced through the tangle of her fear and self-recrimination, sharp and bright. She looked at him, this man who had given up so much and asked for nothing in return, and felt something shift inside her. He had chosen her, fully and without reservation. Maybe it was time she chose him the same way. Not by trying to minimize herself or make up for her existence, but by trusting that his love was real and strong enough to weather the storms it had called down. I am sorry, she said quietly. I have been so caught up in my own fear that I have not been fair to you. You are worth staying for, Dorian. You are worth everything. He smiled, and the relief in his expression was palpable. Then stay. Not because you owe me, but because you want to. Because we are building something together, and it does not matter how long it takes or how hard it is. We will make it work. She nodded, and this time when he pulled her into his arms, she let herself sink into the embrace without reservation. They sat together in the quiet kitchen, the lamp burning low on the table, and for the first time in weeks, Kara felt the fear begin to loosen its grip. But the cost of Dorian's choice was not finished exacting itself. 3 weeks later, in the early days of autumn, a man named Victor Sterling arrived at the house. He was tall and well-dressed, with the kind of polished confidence that came from money and social standing. Dorian greeted him with wary courtesy, and Kara hung back in the hallway, uncertain whether she should retreat or stand her ground. Dorian, Victor said, striding into the parlor with the ease of someone accustomed to being welcome everywhere. It has been too long. I was sorry to hear about the situation with the Whitfields. Were you? Dorian said flatly. Victor smiled, a thin, calculating expression. I was. Lord Whitfield can be remarkably short-sighted, but his loss may be my gain. I have come to discuss the possibility of a partnership. My family owns the land west of here, as you know, and I have been looking for a reliable neighbor to coordinate planting schedules with. I think we could be mutually beneficial to one another. Dorian's expression did not change. What are your terms? Standard agreements, Victor said, pulling a folded document from his coat pocket. Shared access to irrigation, coordinated crop rotation, a percentage exchange on yields. Everything spelled out clearly, all very reasonable. I think you will find it an excellent opportunity, especially given your recent difficulties. Dorian took the document and scanned it, his brow furrowing. Kara watched from the hallway, her instincts prickling with unease. Something about Victor's smooth demeanor felt wrong, like a trap wrapped in expensive paper. This seems fair, Dorian said slowly. But I need to know, are you aware of my current household arrangements? Victor's smile widened. You mean the orc woman? Yes, I heard. Quite the scandal. But I am a practical man, Dorian. I do not concern myself with my neighbor's personal choices, as long as they do not interfere with business. Good, Dorian said, though his tone remained cautious. Then you should know that Kara is not simply a guest here. She is my partner in managing this estate, and any agreement I sign will include her input. Victor's smile did not falter. Of course. I have no objection to including her in discussions if that is what you prefer. Shall we sit down and review the terms together? Kara did not trust him. She did not trust the ease with which he dismissed her presence, the way his eyes slid over her without really seeing her. But Dorian needed this partnership, needed the stability it could provide after the losses of the past months. She stepped into the parlor and took a seat beside Dorian, as Victor settled into the armchair across from them. They spent the next hour reviewing the contract. Victor was charming and deferential, asking Kara's opinion on irrigation schedules and nodding thoughtfully at her suggestions. He praised Dorian's management of the estate and expressed admiration for the improvements made to the soil quality in the eastern fields. By the time he rose to leave, the contract signed and tucked back into his coat, even Kara's suspicions had begun to ease. "I look forward to a long and profitable partnership," Victor said, shaking Dorian's hand. He inclined his head politely to Kara. "And thank you for your insights, Miss Prynne. It is clear Dorian is fortunate to have such a capable partner." After he left, Dorian let out a long breath and pulled Kara close, resting his forehead against hers. "Maybe things are starting to turn around," he said quietly. She wanted to believe him. But the unease in her gut would not quite go away. It took 2 months for the trap to spring. By then, autumn had painted the valley in shades of amber and rust, and Kara had begun to let herself hope that the worst was over. The partnership with Victor seemed to be going smoothly. He visited occasionally to discuss planting plans and water usage, always polite, always respectful. He even brought small gifts, a sack of seed potatoes, a bottle of decent wine, once a book of poetry he thought Kara might enjoy. Then, in mid-November, Dorian received a letter from the magistrate's office. It was brief and formal, informing him that a complaint had been filed regarding the harboring of a potentially dangerous individual on his property. A hearing was scheduled for the following week to determine whether Kara's presence constituted a threat to public safety. Dorian read the letter twice, his face going pale, then crumpled it in his fist. "Victor," he said, his voice low and furious. "It has to be Victor. No one else has had access to the details of our household." Kara felt cold all over. Why would he do this? He signed the partnership agreement. "He said he did not care about my presence here." "He lied," Dorian said. "He wanted access to the property, and the easiest way to get it was to pretend tolerance. Now that he has the contract, he can push me out and claim breach of partnership terms if I am found to be harboring a danger to the community. He gets the land access without the inconvenience of a partner." It was clever and vicious, and exactly the kind of calculated cruelty Kara had learned to expect from people who saw her as less than human. She sank into a chair, her hands shaking. "What do? We fight," Dorian said immediately. "We go to the hearing, and we present evidence of your character. I will bring the ledgers to show how you have managed the estate. I will bring testimony from the hired hands about your work. I will fight this with everything I have." But the hearing was a disaster from the start. The magistrate, a gray-haired man named Aldrich Moore, listened to Dorian's testimony with a stony expression. He glanced through the ledgers without interest. When Dorian tried to call the hired hands as witnesses, Magistrate Moore waved the request away, stating that employees could not be expected to give unbiased testimony about their employer's household. Victor was there, sitting in the back of the courtroom with an expression of sympathy that made Kara's skin crawl. He did not testify, did not need to. The complaint had been filed anonymously, and the magistrate seemed disinclined to investigate its origins too closely. "Mr. Gale," Magistrate Moore said when Dorian had exhausted his arguments, "I understand your loyalty to this individual. However, the law is clear. Orc populations pose a documented risk to human settlements, particularly in isolated rural areas. The fact that this particular orc has not yet caused harm does not negate the potential for future violence. She has lived in my home for nearly a year without incident, Dorian said, his voice tight with barely restrained anger. She has worked tirelessly to improve the estate. She has shown nothing but integrity and kindness. On what grounds can you possibly justify removing her? On the grounds of public safety, Magistrate Moore said. Miss Prynne has until the end of the week to vacate your property. If she is found within the county borders after that time, she will be subject to arrest and deportation to the border territories. Kara felt the world tilt beneath her. Dorian was arguing, his voice rising, but the words blurred together into meaningless noise. She stood abruptly, drawing the magistrate's attention. "I will leave," she said. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears, as though someone else was speaking. "I will go voluntarily. There is no need for further conflict." "Kara, no," Dorian said, turning to her with stricken eyes. "We can appeal, we can no," she said more firmly. She looked at him, this man she loved more than her own life, and felt her heart break cleanly in two. "You have lost enough because of me. I will not let you lose your home as well." She walked out of the courtroom before he could argue further, before the tears burning behind her eyes could spill over. She heard him call her name, heard his footsteps behind her, but she did not stop. She walked all the way back to the house, her vision blurred, her chest so tight she could barely breathe. By the time Dorian caught up to her, she was in the bedroom, pulling her few belongings from the wardrobe and piling them on the bed. He stood in the doorway, his face anguished. "Kara, please," he said. "Do not do this. We will find another way." "There is no other way," she said. She folded a spare dress with shaking hands and added it to the pile. "The magistrate has made his ruling. If I stay, they will arrest me and they will punish you for harboring me. I will not let that happen." "I do not care what they do to me," Dorian said desperately. He crossed the room and caught her hands, stilling her frantic packing. "Kara, I do not care. Let them arrest me, let them take the house, let them take everything. I will not lose you." "You will," she said, and her voice broke. "You will lose me eventually anyway, because I am an orc and you are human, and the world will never let us be together in peace. At least this way you keep your home. You keep your life. You can rebuild what you have lost, find someone suitable." "I do not want someone suitable," Dorian said fiercely. "I want you. Only you. Kara, please, you are not listening. I do not care about the house or the land or any of it. You are what matters. We can leave together, go somewhere new, start over. And how long before the same thing happens there?" Kara asked. She pulled her hands free and turned away, unable to bear the look in his eyes. "How long before someone files another complaint, another hearing, another ruling? How many times will you sacrifice your future for me before you realize it is not worth it?" "It is always worth it," Dorian said. "You are always worth it." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to throw herself into his arms and agree to run away together, to hell with the consequences. But she was so tired. Tired of hiding, tired of fighting, tired of being the reason the man she loved suffered. Maybe the magistrate was right. Maybe her presence here was a kind of violence, a slow destruction of everything good in Dorian's life. "I am leaving in the morning," she said quietly. "Please do not make this harder than it already is." She heard him take a shuddering breath behind her. Then his footsteps retreated and the door closed softly. Kara sank onto the bed, her packed belongings spilling around her, and finally let herself cry. She did not sleep that night. She lay in the dark and listened to the familiar sounds of the house, trying to memorize them. The creak of the floorboards, the sigh of the wind against the windows, the distant hoot of an owl in the trees beyond the eastern field. all the small pieces of a home she had never quite believed she deserved. In the morning, she rose before dawn and finished packing. She carried her bag downstairs, intending to slip out quietly, but Dorian was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee in front of him. He looked like he had not slept either, his eyes shadowed and his expression haggard. "I made breakfast," he said. "You should eat before you go." She could not possibly eat, but she sat down across from him anyway. He pushed a plate of eggs and toast toward her, and they sat in silence, neither of them touching the food. "Where will you go?" Dorian asked finally. "South," Kara said. "Toward the coast, maybe. I heard there are cities there that are more tolerant of mixed populations." "Take the wagon," Dorian said. "And money, I have savings, you should know," she said firmly. "You have given me enough, Dorian, more than enough. I will not take anything else from you." He looked at her with such raw pain that she had to look away. "Will you write to me?" he asked. "Let me know you are safe." She wanted to say yes, but she knew that letters would only make the wound bleed longer, would only stretch out the agony of separation until they were both hollowed out by it. "It is better if I do not," she said quietly. "A clean break for both of us." Dorian's jaw tightened, but he nodded. They sat together until the sun began to rise, painting the kitchen in pale gold light, and then Kara stood and picked up her bag. "Goodbye, Dorian," she said. "Thank you for everything." He stood too, and for a moment she thought he would try to stop her again. But he simply pulled her into one last embrace, holding her so tightly she could feel the rapid thud of his heart against her cheek. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "That does not end just because you are leaving." "I love you too," she said. "Always." She pulled away before her resolve could crumble and walked out the front door into the cold morning air. She did not look back. She could not. If she looked back, she would never leave. The road south stretched before her, empty and bleak, and Kara walked it alone. She made it as far as the village before her courage failed. Not courage to keep walking, she had plenty of that, a grim determination to see this through no matter how much it hurt. But courage to believe this was the right choice. With every step, the certainty that had driven her out of Dorian's house crumbled a little more. She was at the edge of the village square, about to continue on to the southern road, when she heard a familiar voice call her name. She turned to find Eleanor Grant, the elderly woman who sold honey and candles at the market, hurrying toward her with surprising speed for someone of her years. "Kara, wait," Eleanor said, slightly breathless. "I heard about the magistrate's ruling. I am so sorry." Kara managed a wan smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Grant. I appreciate your kindness." "Kindness," Eleanor scoffed. "What is kind about standing by while injustice is done? No, I am not here to offer sympathy. I am here to tell you that you are making a mistake." Kara blinked. "I do not understand." "You are leaving to protect Dorian, yes, because you think your presence brings him harm." Eleanor shook her head. "Child, you are not thinking clearly. That man loves you. Anyone with eyes can see it. And you are about to break his heart because you have been convinced you are not worth fighting for." "It is not about worth," Kara protested. "It is about reality. The magistrate has ruled. If I stay, I will be arrested and Dorian will be punished for harboring me. I am trying to spare him that." "You are trying to spare yourself," Eleanor said, not unkindly. "From the pain of fighting, from the risk of losing. But love is not about protecting yourself, Kara. It is about standing together even when the world tells you to run." The words struck deep, and Kara felt her carefully constructed resolve waver. "I am afraid," she admitted. "I am afraid that if I stay, I will destroy everything good in his life." "You already are the good in his life," Eleanor said gently. She reached out and took Kara's hand. "I have watched that man for months, seen the way he looks at you. He is happier with you, even with all the hardship, than he ever was before you arrived. Do not take that from him because you are afraid. Be brave enough to stay and fight for what you both deserve." Kara's throat tightened. "What if we lose?" "Then you lose together," Elinor said. "And you pick yourselves up and try again, but at least you will have tried. At least you will know you did not give up on each other." Kara looked down at the bag in her hand, at the road stretching south, at the life of lonely wandering that waited for her. Then she thought of Dorian sitting alone in the kitchen, of the home they had built together, of the love that had grown between them against all odds. "I need to go back," she said. Elinor smiled. "Yes, you do." Kara turned and ran. She ran back through the village, ignoring the stairs, ran up the long drive to the house with her bag thumping against her back. She burst through the front door, breathless and wild, and found Dorian still sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. He looked up at the sound of her entrance, shock and hope warring on his face. "Kara, I am not leaving," she said. "I am not running away. I am staying, and we are fighting this together. I do not care what the magistrate says. I do not care what Victor Sterling or anyone else tries to do. This is my home, and you are my family, and I am not giving that up without a fight." Dorian was on his feet in an instant, crossing the room to her. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough. "Kara, are you absolutely sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything," she said. And then he was kissing her, fierce and desperate and full of relief, and she was kissing him back, and the fear that had driven her away finally released its hold. They broke apart, both breathing hard, and Dorian rested his forehead against hers. "We need a plan," he said. "The magistrate gave you until the end of the week. That gives us 3 days to figure out how to fight this." "Then we had better start now," Kara said. They worked through the day, drafting letters to anyone who might have influence with the magistrate or sway in the county. Dorian wrote to his late father's old friends, to business contacts, to anyone he thought might be sympathetic to their cause. Kara composed a detailed account of her arrival, her work on the estate, the value she had brought to the household and the community. They gathered statements from the hired hands, from Elinor Grant, from a handful of other villagers who were willing to speak on Kara's behalf despite the social risk. It was not much, but it was something. On the second day, they received an unexpected visitor. Martin Drake, a wealthy landowner from the neighboring county, arrived in the afternoon with his wife. Dorian greeted them with confusion. He barely knew Martin, had only met him once or twice at agricultural fairs, but the couple wasted no time explaining their presence. "We heard about your situation," Martin said, settling into the parlor with his wife beside him. "And we wanted to offer our support." "Your support," Dorian repeated carefully. Martin nodded. "My wife is an orc, has been for the 12 years we have been married. We have faced similar prejudice, similar rulings, similar attempts to drive us apart. We won our fight, and we are here to help you win yours." Kara stared at Martin's wife, a tall orc woman with kind eyes and graying hair, and felt something loosen in her chest. "You stayed together," she said. "Despite everything." "Despite everything," Martin's wife, whose name was Nara, confirmed. She smiled at Kara. "It was not easy, but we built a life together, and now we have 3 grown children and more grandchildren than I can count. It can be done, Kara. You just have to be stubborn enough to see it through." They stayed for hours, sharing strategies and legal precedents, offering to testify at any appeal hearing. By the time they left, Kara felt something she had not felt in weeks: hope. On the 3rd day, Victor Sterling arrived. He rode up to the house with the easy confidence of a man who believed he had already won. Dorian met him at the door, his expression cold. "Victor," Dorian said, "I wondered when you would show your face. Victor had the grace to look mildly uncomfortable. I heard you were gathering support for an appeal. I wanted to discuss a possible compromise. A compromise, Dorian said flatly. You mean you are afraid your scheme is going to fall apart? I prefer to think of it as protecting my interests, Victor said smoothly. But yes, I understand that Martin Drake has offered to testify on your behalf. Martin has considerable influence, and I would rather not engage in a prolonged legal battle. So, I am prepared to withdraw my complaint in exchange for dissolving our partnership agreement. You want the land access without the partnership, Dorian said. I want to avoid unnecessary conflict, Victor corrected. You keep your orc woman, I keep my access to the western water routes. Everyone walks away satisfied. Dorian's jaw tightened. Kara stepped up beside him and placed a hand on his arm. What exactly are you proposing? She asked Victor. Victor turned his attention to her, his expression calculating. A new contract. I retain rights to the western irrigation channels. You retain full control of your property and household, and we agree to stay out of each other's business going forward. No partnerships, no shared responsibilities, just neighborly coexistence. Kara glanced at Dorian, who looked like he wanted to throw Victor off the property. But beneath the anger, she saw the exhaustion, the toll the past months had taken. They could fight Victor in court, and they might win, but it would cost time and money and energy they could be spending on building their life together. We want it in writing, Kara said. A contract stating that you withdraw your complaint and relinquish any claim to partnership agreements. And we want a public statement acknowledging that you filed the complaint without just cause. Victor hesitated. That seems excessive. That is the price of a compromise, Kara said coolly. Otherwise, we see you in court and we let Martin Drake's testimony reveal exactly what kind of man you are. Victor's smile thinned. Very well. I will have my solicitor draw up the documents. He left, and Dorian pulled Kara into a tight embrace. You were magnificent, he murmured. Absolutely magnificent. I was angry, Kara said, but I think we made the right choice. Sometimes the victory is not in crushing your enemy, but in getting what you need and walking away. The documents arrived 2 days later, signed and notarized. The magistrate officially withdrew the complaint, citing new evidence and testimony. Victor Sterling kept his access to the water routes and stayed far away from Dorian's property. The hired hands spread word through the village that the ruling had been overturned, and slowly, cautiously, the hostility began to thaw. It was not immediate acceptance. Some people still avoided Kara when she came to market, still muttered under their breath about unnatural alliances. But others, emboldened by a leaner grant and by the example of the Drakes, began to nod greetings. The butcher started offering her the same cuts of meat he saved for his preferred customers. The grocer's daughter asked Kara for advice on keeping household accounts. Winter arrived, blanketing the valley in snow, and Kara settled into the rhythm of a life lived openly. She no longer hid when visitors came. She sat beside Dorian at the dining table when neighbors stopped by, participated in conversations, offered opinions. Some guests were awkward, uncertain how to interact with her. Others were genuinely curious, asking questions about orc customs and traditions that Kara answered as best she could. Dorian proposed on the first day of spring, when the snow was melting and the fields were turning green. He did it simply, without grand gestures or elaborate speeches. They were working in the garden together, planting seeds for the summer vegetables, and he reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring his mother had worn. "Marry me," he said. "Make this official. Be my wife, my partner, my everything." Kara's hands were covered in dirt, her braid coming loose, her apron stained with mud. She looked down at the ring, then up at Dorian's face, and felt a surge of love so strong it stole her breath. "Yes," she said. 1,000 times yes. They were married in early summer in a small ceremony at the house. Martin and Nara Drake attended, along with Alina Grant and a handful of other villagers who had become genuine friends. The local priest had refused to perform the ceremony, but Martin knew a traveling cleric who was willing. It was not the grand society wedding Dorian's mother might have dreamed of for her son, but it was perfect. Kara wore a simple dress in pale blue, and Dorian wore his best suit, and when the cleric pronounced them married, they kissed to a chorus of cheers and good-natured laughter. The celebration that followed was warm and joyful, the kind of gathering where people drank too much and told stories late into the night and danced on the lawn under the stars. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Dorian pulled Kara aside. "There is something I want to show you," he said. He led her to the kitchen, to the narrow door beside the pantry. The root cellar. Kara had not been down there since the day he had pulled her out of it and introduced her to the Whitfields. She looked at him questioningly. "I want to seal it," Dorian said. "Board it up permanently. I do not want you to ever have a reason to hide again. This house is yours, Kara. Every room, every corner, every inch of it. I want you to know that." She felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, the kind that came from happiness too big to contain. "I love you," she said. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Dorian said. He pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "Let us build a life where no one hides, where we can just be ourselves together." And that was what they did. The first year of their marriage was not easy. There were still people who disapproved, still moments of tension and awkwardness. But there were also unexpected kindnesses. Farmers who stopped by to share tips on improving crop yields. Women who invited Kara to join their sewing circle, tentative at first but growing warmer as she proved herself thoughtful and skilled with a needle. Children who grew used to seeing her at the market and waved hello without fear. Kara and Dorian worked side by side through the seasons, managing the farm, hosting dinners, building a community around themselves, one careful friendship at a time. Kara learned to stop flinching when visitors arrived, learned to trust that she had a right to stand beside her husband without shame. Dorian learned to let go of the lingering anger toward people like Victor Sterling, focusing instead on the life they were creating together. In the second year, Kara became pregnant. It was unexpected and terrifying and wonderful all at once. She worried about what kind of life they could offer a half-orc child in a world that still harbored so much prejudice. But Dorian was ecstatic, already planning a nursery and building a cradle with his own hands. Their son was born in late autumn, a squalling, healthy baby with his father's gray eyes and his mother's green-tinged skin. They named him Ivan Gale, and Dorian cried when he held his son for the first time, overcome with a joy so fierce it left him speechless. Alina Grant was the first to visit after the birth, bringing jars of honey and a hand-knitted blanket. "He is beautiful," she said, peering down at Ivan with a soft smile. "You are going to be wonderful parents." Kara, exhausted and sore but happier than she had ever been, smiled back. "Thank you for everything. You were the one who convinced me to stay and fight. I owe you more than I can say." "You owe me nothing," Alina said. "You two did the hard work. I just gave you a little push in the right direction." Other visitors followed. Nara Drake came with a basket of baby clothes her own grandchildren had outgrown. The hired hands stopped by to offer awkward congratulations and hand-carved wooden toys. Even some of the neighbors who had been coolest toward Kara softened at the sight of the baby, offering tentative smiles and well wishes. The world was changing slowly. Not everywhere, not all at once, but here in this small corner of the valley, Something new was taking root. A family that defied convention. A community that was learning to see past old prejudices. A future that held more possibility than fear. When Ivan was 6 months old, Dorian came to Kara with an idea. "I want to host a gathering," he said. "A proper one, with invitations and food and all the neighbors invited. I want to show everyone what we have built here, what we can offer. And I want you to greet the guests at the door, as the lady of this house, as my wife." Kara felt a flutter of old fear, but it was distant now, muted by years of standing her ground. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I have never been more sure," Dorian said. "This is your home, Kara. Let everyone see it." They planned the gathering for a warm day in late spring. Invitations went out to everyone in the surrounding area, including people who had never quite warmed to Kara's presence. Some declined, their excuses transparent, but many accepted, curious or kind or simply interested in the food and company. On the day of the gathering, Kara dressed in her best gown, a deep green that complemented her skin. She braided her hair carefully, tucking wildflowers into the plaits. She held Ivan on her hip as she stood beside Dorian at the front door, watching the first carriages roll up the drive. Her heart was beating fast, but it was not the frantic, fearful rhythm of the past. It was anticipation, excitement, the knowledge that she was about to step fully into the life she had built. The first guests to arrive were the Drakes, Nara beaming as she embraced Kara. "You look radiant," she said. "This is going to be wonderful." Eleanor Grant came next, bringing a towering honey cake that made everyone exclaim. The hired hands arrived with their families, their children running off to explore the gardens. One by one, neighbors arrived, some stiff and formal, others genuinely warm. Kara greeted each one with grace and dignity, her smile steady, her voice clear. And every single person walked through the door she held open, into the house she and Dorian had made a home. The gathering spilled out onto the lawn as the afternoon wore on. Tables were laden with food, children played games under the trees, and adults clustered in groups, talking and laughing. Kara moved through the crowd with Ivan in her arms, pausing to chat with guests, accepting compliments on the meal and the decorations. At one point, she found herself standing near the kitchen door, looking out at the scene. Dorian appeared beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking about the root cellar," Kara said. She leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "About how I used to hide down there every time someone came to visit. How terrified I was that they would see me and ruin everything." Dorian pressed a kiss to her temple. "And now I am standing at my own front door welcoming people into my home," Kara said, her voice caught slightly. "I never thought I would have this, a place where I belong, a family. You have always belonged," Dorian said quietly. "I am just glad you finally believe it." They stood together, watching their neighbors and friends enjoy the gathering, and Kara felt a deep, settled peace. The road to this moment had been long and difficult, marked by fear and loss and hard-won victories. But they had walked it together, and they had come out the other side stronger for it. Later, as the sun began to set and guests started to leave, an elderly couple approached Kara. She recognized them vaguely, the Hendersons, who owned a small farm to the north and had always been polite but distant. "Mrs. Gale," the wife said, her voice tentative. "We wanted to thank you for inviting us today. It was lovely." "You are very welcome," Kara said warmly. "I am glad you could come." The husband cleared his throat. "We also wanted to apologize. We were among those who were not kind when you first arrived in the area. We listened to gossip and made assumptions, and we are sorry for that. Seeing you and Dorian together, seeing the life you have built, it has changed our thinking. You are a good woman and we are grateful to know you." Kara felt tears well up, but she blinked them back and smiled. "Thank you," she said. "That means more than you know." They left, and Kara watched their carriage roll away down the drive. She felt Dorian's hand find hers, their fingers interlacing. "You did it," he said. "You stood at the door and welcomed everyone in, and you were magnificent." "We did it," Kara corrected. She looked up at him, this man who had chosen her again and again, who had refused to let shame or prejudice or fear define their life together. "We did it together." As the last guests departed and the household settled into quiet, Kara and Dorian walked through the empty rooms, picking up stray cups and straightening furniture. Ivan was asleep upstairs, watched over by one of the hired hand's daughters. The house smelled of flowers and good food, and the evening light slanted through the windows in golden bars. When they reached the kitchen, Kara paused by the narrow door beside the pantry. The door to the root cellar, now sealed with boards and hidden behind a tapestry Nara had given them as a wedding gift. She touched the tapestry lightly, remembering the darkness below, the fear that had driven her down into it time and time again. "I do not miss it," she said. "Good," Dorian said. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You will never have to hide again." She turned in his embrace and kissed him, slow and sweet. "I love you," she said. "Thank you for pulling me out of the dark." "I love you too," Dorian said. "Thank you for being brave enough to stay." They stood together in the quiet kitchen, the house around them full of light and warmth and the promise of all the years to come. The root cellar was sealed, the past laid to rest, and the future stretched out before them like an open road. And Kara, who had once believed she would spend her life hiding, stood tall and unafraid beside the man she loved, ready to face whatever came next. Together.